looks like we're ready to start. So, scaling Bitcoin. Who here has heard about the fact that Bitcoin is not working because you can't buy coffee? Put your hand up if you've heard that before. It's a total mess, isn't it? Who has heard of things like Lightning, Liquid, sidechains, ZK rollups? Who has no idea of anything to do with scaling Bitcoin? All right. Okay, so the reason for me asking that was to try and just gauge where we are as a group. And there are no wrong answers, but I just wanted to get a sense because we've got two very technical fellas here, and they make
One.
me they make me look silly. Like I regard myself as a bit of a, I don't know if we can say this, a bit of a tech retard, and so I wanted to dumb it down for me as well as anybody else who might just find some of the stuff highly complex. So let's start off with framing the key issue at hand here. Bitcoin is said to have a scaling problem. I want to throw this one at Pete. What does that actually mean when people say that?
So I think it means one of two things. It's either how do we get more transactional throughput onto Bitcoin? So you'll hear people talk about it only does like X amount of transactions per second, and that needs to be higher to compete with Visa. That's one angle people come at from a scaling point of view. And then the other one is how many people can literally hold Bitcoin themselves. So I think you've got the sort of technical throughput scaling, and then you've got the more user-based, like how many people can we support using this system? So will it do 8 billion people on the planet?
It's very interesting. It almost immediately splits out into Bitcoin as a currency and Bitcoin as the asset, and you can sort of they sort of both scale in the similar ways, but the harder one is to scale is Bitcoin for payments because you need more payments to make your everyday payments. Whereas if you're doing it as an asset, you can sort of just buy a massive chunk once and never buy again if you really wanted to.
Let's just zoom in on that particular issue. So we're talking about Bitcoin, the small b being the currency, big B being the network. So when we're talking about the actual currency itself, it's obviously got 21 quadrillion satoshis. So there's an inherent scarcity there and a limitation,
Mhm.
the number of satoshis that each of the 8 billion people on Earth can have. And then in terms of the network, are we then talking about the throughput in terms of the pace and the number of transactions we can actually, conduct
Yeah,
between ourselves?
I mean, I to me the sticking point with most scaling stuff is probably the ownership aspect. And so the limit on that wouldn't really be the quadrillion coins because we can subdivide further. That would be okay. You can do that without really impacting the supply. But what you do have is that if you're going to own a UTXO, so a UTXO is the unique transaction output. This is like, to the best analogy, what a Bitcoin is. There's only a fixed amount of those UTXOs that can ever be transacted within a 1 year period. So we have a fixed block size in Bitcoin. It's well, roughly 4 MB when you include all the witness data in there. And that means that you can, if we take something like Lightning, which was always billed as the first scaling solution to Bitcoin as a layer, what we would find if you're going to have Lightning channels and you're going to renew your channel maybe once a year, and say that's like a minimum amount, you could probably support about 20 million Lightning channels on the network. So all of a sudden, if you say, okay, well, there's 8 billion people and we only have 20 million Lightning channels, then we can see there's a discrepancy there. We can't get enough people having their own Lightning channel on the network.
Would you, in this instance, equate having your own Lightning channel with actual self custody rather than, let's say, relying on a wallet of Satoshi, which has its own channels, someone like me would use?
Yep.
I don't ever
I
run
use it as well. It's not,
Okay, would you believe
I'm
it?
like the guy. I think
Yeah. So is that what you're kind of referring to in that instance? So there's not enough within Lightning itself. There's not enough capacity from a channel perspective for
Uh,
everyone to be
y-
self custody.
You're hinting to a really interesting question is like scaling what? So if you're getting everyone onto Wallet of Satoshi, maybe you're scaling Bitcoin payments, but you're not scaling Bitcoin self-custody. So these Wallet of Satoshi users, they can interact with the Bitcoin network, but they're not actually holding their own keys. And I think when people talk about scaling, they're usually referring to scaling all the properties of Bitcoin. So the self-custody, the censorship resistance, and all the things, pseudonymity, all these things that come with Bitcoin-based chain. These are the things I think when people refer to scaling, that's sort of the core focus of scaling, but then I guess there are sort of these other ways to scale sort of aspects of Bitcoin that things like Wallet of Satoshi do, but sort of somewhat controversially perhaps.
All right, so why don't we just have a look at the existing scaling solutions, and we can go through each of those, and let's just start with the most well-known and most established, and the one that I'm most familiar with. We have Zap everyone, Lightning. So give us a sort of rundown. Both of you can comment on this in terms of the relative costs and benefits that Lightning has, just so folks get a sense of that.
All right, just before we get into this, because I think we're probably going to go through like a whole bunch of technologies. So just to kind of like give it a frame for people of like what to put where, there's, in my mind, there's kind of like three different ways you're going to attack the scaling solution. One is vertically, so we go up in layers. The other one is horizontally, which means that we're going to take our Bitcoin and go somewhere else, so put it on like a side chain or a different system. And then the final one is around trust. So we're going to work with a bunch of other people and we're going to combine UTXOs in some way. So when I look at something like Lightning, Lightning is a vertical scaling. It's a layered scaling. So it allows you to take your Bitcoin and cumber it on a chain in a way that you can now batch, like a million payments into one on-chain transaction, which obviously is very good for throughput, but it doesn't necessarily get you that ownership level that you want to like the 8 billion people. But I'll let you.
Yeah, maybe I could just backtrack a tiny bit onto the throughput problem, just to make sure all the audience understands. Um, so Bitcoin has blocks have a limited size, and there's only so many transactions you can fit in a block, and there's one block every roughly 10 minutes. And this means that even if everyone in the world tomorrow woke up and wanted to buy Bitcoin on chain, they wouldn't be able to do it. There would be too many transactions and not enough blocks, not enough space in the blocks to get all these transactions through in the network. You can do some rough math in your head. It's like about 2,000 transactions every 10 minutes. It's only so many hours in the day. You multiply that out by the number of days in the year, and there's only like, I think it's maybe 8 million or something transactions per year maximum. So the amount of people, it's actually, Bitcoin's actually quite limited to how many people can start using it, at least at this point in time. So that's why we're talking about Lightning, is we want to scale the number of people that can have access to Bitcoin. And so maybe we can get into how Lightning works a little bit. Basically, the idea of a lot of these scaling solutions is that we can do multiple. We can do we can sort of compress transactions off chain. So we can initialize sort of an agreement on chain. So Pete and I could say, let's put money in a pool together. And then Pete and I can sort of exchange IOUs back and forth, and we don't actually have to tell the whole world, the whole Bitcoin blockchain about these IOUs that Pete and I are settling between each other. And so we can make all these IOUs back and forth, and we can do that as much as we like, because that's unbounded. Pete and I can exchange these IOUs over and over and over, and there's no limit to that. So that's sort of the idea of some of these scaling solutions, especially Lightning, is that you can make a lot of transactions off chain and only have one or two transactions on chain. That's where the limiting factor is the on chain block space.
Okay, so it looks to me that there's just a lot of advantages. Talk to us about the disadvantages now of Lightning. And are there any practical examples you can actually point to where Lightning has actually been, its flaws, inherent flaws have been sort of brought to the fore, as it were?
I mean, I think the one that's playing out a lot at the moment is people coming to this realization that we can't all have our own Lightning channel. So like having your own Lightning channel is very nice because, as Nick said, you make your first Lightning transaction to open a channel, and then at some point in the future, you're going to make another one to close it. Now, you can make like 10 million transactions in that time across that channel, and you can make payments and you get instant settlement and everything's very fast, and that's all great. The problem is, like, when you see something like fees spike in the network, and if we project forward into a world where Bitcoin's worth more money in the future, and now transactions on chain are costing, like $1,000, $10,000 just to put a transaction through. Well, the amount of transactions that you need to offset to make it worthwhile to make those two transactions, you need to do a lot of sort of economic activity to do that. And so it's not even necessary from a space point of view is one reason why you might not have your own Lightning channel, but also it just might not make sense unless you're processing something like $21 million worth of transactions yourself, then you might not get a decent rate on those transactions. So I think that's where people are starting to realize that it's kind of easier just to go with a custodial system for something like that that still works with Lightning, but it doesn't give you the ownership of the thing. And that's the trade-off. So it's probably important that in all of these layers, there's always a trade-off to what you're doing. You're giving up something on base
Yeah.
to go somewhere else.
And a big trade-off with Lightning, if you're running your own Lightning node and you open what's called a channel with someone else, um, the state of these sort of IOUs in the channel, they're continually updating, and and the person you have opened a Lightning channel with, they can try and cheat you at any time, and they can try and publish an old state of what your Lightning channel looked like, and they could try and claim back more funds than they're actually meant to have. They forget some of the IOUs that you gave that or that they gave you. They sort of cut them out. And so one of the requirements of Lightning is that you have to be sort of live. You have to be sort of watching the Bitcoin blockchain, or the software does it for you, but it has implications for the user. So your Lightning node has to be online and sort of watching the Bitcoin blockchain constantly to make sure that someone's not trying to cheat it. And so this is one of the big trade-offs of Lightning, is this sort of liveness. There's some other ones like payment routing.
Yeah, I'll maybe do liquidity. So
Mm,
like one of the nice things about Bitcoin when you first use it is you realize there'll be like a string of characters on the internet. And if you put those into your wallet and you hit send, then money just squirts to that person. You've got no idea where they are. You've got no idea what's going on. They don't know who sent it. It's kind of very powerful and it's a very nice experience. It's kind of what you want a payment to look like. I just want to go send to Nick. Now, one of the problems with Lightning when you initially set it up is that I might set up a channel with Nick, and you would think, therefore, Nick can send me money, but he can't. Because I set up the channel, all of the money goes in one direction. So until I've sent money out, I can't get money in. So all of a sudden, then you have a problem of like, okay, well, how do I get inbound liquidity back to me?
yeah, a good analogy for like what a Lightning channel sort of looks like. You can imagine like an abacus. So if uh, Pete and I have an abacus or a piece of string between us, and we have these IOUs on beads, like sort of flowing between each other. And when I first say create a channel with Pete, all the beads are on my side. I deposit the money. I've got all the beads. He can't send any money my way. There's nothing for him to send. So I have to actually send money towards Pete first, and then he can start sending some back. So this is sort of the liquidity challenge in Lightning, and this extends to multiple channels. So if I want to pay a person down the line, we have to make sure there's liquidity enough in every channel to flow the money in a particular direction. Otherwise, the payment will fail.
So I think, like in terms of that, because that sounds horrible, right, when you say it, but then when you use Lightning, it doesn't feel like that.
No.
And that's because we can work around a bunch of these things. So we could purchase this incoming liquidity. People can open up channels. It does kind of work. It's just a slightly odd, intuitive way of building a payment system. But
Yeah.
it's amazing for if you just wanted to balance payments across, say, 20 million banks. They would be great for that.
Right. Okay. But for the average person, the TLDR, or the T too long didn't read, is basically the way that with the problem we have with Lightning potentially is there's not going to be enough liquidity for everyone to have their own Lightning channel. So we inherently have to rely on the likes of Wallet of Satoshi and these custodial solutions. And the inherent trade-off there is that it's actually not your own money. You're like, while it's sitting with them, they could literally rug you. Is that literally what it comes down to on
Uh,
a practical level?
Maybe in the distant future, if Bitcoin is like very competitive to use for block space. At the moment, you can download Phoenix Wallet and you can have a self custody Lightning wallet that will work really well, and it won't cost you too much if you're doing things right. And I highly recommend trying it. So at the moment, it's okay. Like, and you can do self custodial Lightning at the moment, but yeah, it does come with this caveat that if Bitcoin does get as popular as we think it will, then yeah, we're gonna have Lightning for the everyday person could become very expensive. Yeah.
There's maybe one more thing just to mention in the trade-offs is that there is so in Bitcoin we have like a dust limit. So that there's a point of when you're paying fees to get a transaction confirmed on chain, you've got to pay a certain amount. if you're trying to transact anything that's less than those fees, it's just a non-economical transaction. We'll just throw that out. So you can't really get anything confirmed. And so whilst in Lightning, you will have a bunch of transactions where ostensibly you could own, like 21 sats in your Lightning channel, you can never actually get that out onto base chain.
Yes.
So like one thing that comes up a lot when talking about scaling Bitcoin is, do I have like a unilateral exit from this system? So Lightning technically has a unilateral exit because you can always fall back on chain and say, here's my transaction, give me my Bitcoin. But it does have like an economic limit to that. So again, if like fees are $10,000 at some point in the future, maybe I'm more bullish than Nick on this one. Then what you're going to find is that for any payment below $10,000, like you can't actually clear that because it's all fee.
And that inherently makes sense. You'd only be wanting to move like billions of dollars if you're going to be spending 10 grand to move it on chain. And I think that's something that I want to touch on later when we talk about something actually practical like UTXO consolidation, which might sound like really complicated, but it's actually idiot proof. I figured out how to do it, so anyone can. Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about Lightning now. So that is the sort of vertical scaling solution. We've discussed some of the sort of inherent trade-offs. Something that only has recently resonated with me is Liquid. And I had to play around with a wallet called Aqua by Jan3. I really like it. One of the most amazing things was being able to see that you can actually have Tether on Liquid. And so essentially people can eventually get out of shitcoinery and stop having USD stablecoins on things like Tron and ETH and all that kind of thing. But talk to us firstly about like what Liquid is as a sidechain. Well, maybe let's start there. What the hell is a sidechain? Then what is Liquid, and what are some of the other alternatives? And then we can talk about the trade-offs of each.
So Liquid is basically it's a blockchain like Bitcoin. I think it's very much based on the Bitcoin blockchain. But instead of miners deciding which transactions get included into a block and using proof of work to determine what is the source of truth, instead there's a federation of people. I think there's 15 or so Liquid guardians, and these people are distributed all around the world. And these people, all the funds that get sent to the Liquid blockchain, they're all controlled by these 15 people, and it's in a multi-sig. So you need like, I don't know if it's 7 or 15, or I'm making numbers up, but it's shared between these Liquid members. So one of the biggest downside of Liquid is that you're essentially giving custody to these other people. That you send Bitcoin to the Liquid Federation. They make an address for you. You deposit money to them, and then they'll give you credits in this side chain. And in the Liquid side chain, then you can make fast transactions. The block times are much faster. You can do other cool stuff like confidential transactions and other things that they want to do on Liquid. So it's like a sort of like a custom version of Bitcoin that is in some sense permissioned, but it is federated. That it is the risk is sort of distributed around the world and amongst a number of individuals. And it does. So a good thing about Liquid is that it uses the Bitcoin denomination. That's an important thing, that you don't get some other token of some sort. It's Bitcoin IOUs.
All right. So in our scaling framework we've got vertical, we've got horizontal, and we've got trust. Liquid is horizontal with a bit of trust, would be my view of this. So what you're doing is you're saying, all right, well, we're going to run out of space on Bitcoin and its blockchain, and we can only do so much. So let's just go somewhere else. And the somewhere else is just a different blockchain that's called Liquid. So what you're doing is you're giving up Bitcoin. You no longer have Bitcoin anymore. You have something called Liquid Bitcoin. And Liquid Bitcoin is a promise of these, let's call it 15 of 21 people that are then going to give you back Bitcoin if you ask for it. So it's kind of like a way of like you just move somewhere else. We say, look, instead of being on Bitcoin all the time, let's just go over there. And if we go over there, we have Bitcoin or something that looks like Bitcoin, smells like Bitcoin. It's not quite Bitcoin. We lose some of the properties, so it's not quite as censorship resistant anymore. It's but it is faster, like it settles every minute. It does have like confidential transactions on it, so it's a lot more private. You can't see the amounts going backwards and forwards everywhere. That's cool. That's a nice little property that it gets. But it does mean that you could be locked out if a whole bunch of companies around the world decide to take that away from you. So you don't get the same trust guarantee you get with your Bitcoin UTXO.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the reason that Liquid is not a layer on top of Bitcoin is because you don't have this ability to unilaterally exit onto Bitcoin. So with something like Lightning, if someone tries to, you want to escape Lightning, or your channel peer is not responding, or they're trying to do something dodgy, you have the ability to always exit to the main chain without anyone's permission. But with Liquid, you do have to ask for the Federation's permission to help me get my funds out. So that's why Liquid is a side chain and not a layer. And I think Kale had, the guy who made Cashew has a really good, I don't know if he came up with it, but definition of what makes a layer. And it's you need to be able to unilaterally exit. It needs to have the same denomination as Bitcoin, so it's not some other token. It's Bitcoin denominated. And the third one is that it compresses transactions, so you can do multiple transactions in the layer and only do a few transactions on the base layer of Bitcoin. And Liquid does not fulfill this because you can't unilaterally exit.
I think that's a great assessment of both, and it certainly clarified some stuff in my mind. So now we've done the vertical piece, we've done the horizontal piece, and now there's this third revolving piece called trust, eCash, Fedimints, Cashew. What on earth? Like, let's go into some of those. Like, I know you were with Fedi for some time there, Pete. So perhaps you can share a little bit about that project and kind of the problem that they're looking to solve, and then what solution they designed around that particular problem.
Yeah, so as I said, this one's very much the third piece of all trust. And maybe the quickest way of understanding something like that is just to look at like exchanges or banks that you use at the moment, right? Like there's to one element we solved Bitcoin scaling day one, right? Because what Bitcoin really does is it issues a new money, and then it audits it every 10 minutes to tell you who's got it, and then you can move it around. So using those properties, we could already recreate exactly what we've got now, but just on a system where nobody can fuck around with the money. And that's a win. That would be great.
It's a Pete win.
There you go. I don't know if it was. I think there was some Japanese guy that was involved, but and that's all right. And that's one way of doing it. And that would be a lot of trust. And then what we look at is like, are there other ways of doing that are slightly less trusted? So like one of the nice things about Lightning is it sort of got you to this point where you go, okay, well, instead of, let's say, there being 100,000 banks on the Bitcoin network everywhere around the world, all running independently and not asking permission and settling transactions once a day. Now you could have 10 million banks on the Bitcoin network all around the world, not asking permission and settling transactions every second of every day. Like that's a huge win. That's where we got with Lightning, and then that could just look like Wallet of Satoshi, which is a trust-based scaling solution. Solves a lot of stuff. A lot of people now have Bitcoin around the world and use it because they sit in Wallet of Satoshi. Yes, there's trust there, and that could be a problem. What something like Fedimint does is it says, okay, well, if we take something like a Wallet of Satoshi and we can recreate that experience and make it very local to people, could we say take a town of 10,000 people, have 5 people in the town that understand Bitcoin that run some nodes, and then on top of that, we build a whole payment experience. Now that payment experience uses something like eCash. eCash is just a way of accounting for the amount of Bitcoin each person has. So in Wallet of Satoshi, on the back end, there will be a database table, and you'll have an account name, and you'll have a balance. Now, the problem with that is the person that runs that database can see everything that you're doing. They can selectively stop you spending your money. With something like eCash, for the accounting principle, we use what we call bearer tokens. So you would give me 1 Bitcoin, I give you 1 Bitcoin's worth of eCash, which tells you what you've got. We do it in a way that I don't know that I gave it to you or how much you have in total or even that you're really a person. So there's no concept of accounts inside eCash. So then when you go to spend, you send that eCash to somebody else, they swap it out. That's a transaction. I, as a bank that was running that, I've got no idea what just happened. All I'm aware of is that somebody redeemed an eCash token. I just don't know who it is or well, I know how much, but yeah.
Yeah, you nailed it perfectly. Yeah. So all I have to add there is that eCash uses this really cool cryptography called blind signatures, and I think if you saw Tim's talk history of Bitcoin this morning, I think he came up with the idea in something like 1983, and it's only since the advent of Bitcoin that So I think David Charm tried to, make some US dollar bank thing using eCash, but it got shut down, right? They were not going to let them have this like super private bank with US dollars flowing who knows where. But now that we have Bitcoin, we can actually finally make these eCash mints, and we can have these very private sort of IOUs for Bitcoin that scale very well. So yeah, very excited about eCash.
Now, we always want to talk about trade-offs. So there are.
Yeah, what's the downside? Yeah.
So, I mean, who doesn't love like private cash? And this thing has some great properties. Like you can use it offline, for instance, which is very useful in certain situations. Um, but downsides probably two. So two of the most important aspects of Bitcoin are probably not your keys, not your coins, and 21 million Bitcoin. eCash kind of dicks about with both of those. so you've got to be aware of the trade-off that you're making here. So in terms of not your keys, not your coins, you are depositing money with an institution that's going to run like a bank, effectively. So when you put that money in, you are trusting that that bank will give you back that money or help you make a payment in the future. So there is a level of trust there. So you want to know who is running the bank, and you want them to be trustworthy people. Now, a lot of the time that's done in terms of like a community context. So make sure it's somebody that you know, or somebody you could punch in the face if they try and do you wrong. The reality, it doesn't have to be. It could, similar to Liquid, it could be a 17 of 21 multi-sig for companies around the world that we all trust. It could be local. That's an open source program that you can deploy in many different ways. That would be the main one. Do you want to cover inflation? Or do you want me
I think Carly does have some ideas for how you can sort of keep a hold of inflation within an eCash system, but I haven't read the details there.
All right. So the inflation risk that you bring on here is that, again, you give money to a bank and you trust the bank to give you tokens back. That bank can issue itself money. So what you do is you take something like a global inflation problem of like, it doesn't affect Bitcoin's global like monetary supply. There's still only ever 21 million Bitcoin, but the stuff inside a Fedimint isn't necessarily Bitcoin. So that can be inflated locally. Now, then your problem becomes, right, well, what can they do with that? So just because you've got more eCash tokens doesn't necessarily mean that you've got more eCash. That bank, if they wanted to, they could rug everybody in that system and just take all the money and have that. So that might be more effective than trying to print 5 or 10% extra free. But they can also only use it inside that environment. So let's say it's a local bank inside a particular village somewhere in the world, and the local person starts inflating the supply. Well, they can spend that locally. It doesn't really affect anybody else anywhere on the Bitcoin network. And then what Nick was talking about is that there is a model of this where you can make the eCash notes that you get time limited. So you say, okay, well, these run for 1 to 2 months. And every month we're going to rotate how we do these eCash notes. So you can't spend an old one. And what you build into the model of running the bank is effectively a bank run every 2 months. And if you run a bank every 2 months and you can prove that they've been dishonest, well, the people that run that bank aren't going to be trusted to run a bank in the future. So we can add more trust into it.
All right. I know we were running low on time, so I want to quickly nail one topic that I think is really kind of practical and useful, because I think one of the key takeaways that I would sort of want folks to get from this is like, look, there's a whole lot of stuff happening with Bitcoin on multiple layers. We've got the stuff on the side chains. We've got this sort of, this trusted third space, if you like, eCash, Fedi, and stuff like that. But for the average person, this is not something that you need to spend a huge amount of time on. There are way smarter people than us working on these things. But there has been a problem with Bitcoin of late that's come and gone, where people are putting monkeys on the blockchain. They're writing silly messages and they're clogging it up. And so there were times where we've seen fees spike up to, 30, $40. And this made some Lightning wallets like Moon, or maybe it's not a true Lightning wallet, but essentially impractical and unusable. So that brought up the whole idea of consolidating UTXOs. Okay, so this is one of the key things I want people to get from today, because I think that's a very practical thing to do. So this speaks to the issue of dust. So talk to us, just nail that point of dust in, and then just talk about how one consolidates UTXOs and why it's important.
So yeah, when you make a Bitcoin, when you're receiving Bitcoin, say you're withdrawing Bitcoin from an exchange, you get to choose how much you send into your address. The problem is that every time you want to spend Bitcoin, you sort of roughly your transactions are roughly the same amount, like size, and you're going to pay a similar sort of flat fee every time you want to make a transaction. Whether you're sending $1 of Bitcoin or you're sending $1 million of Bitcoin, your transaction fee is going to be the same. Now, when your transaction fees are really high, like we saw lately, it can suddenly become like uneconomical to spend certain UTXOs that you have. So if I have a UTXO worth $2, but the transaction fee is going to cost me $20, then I'm not going to spend it. And so what UTXO consolidate that, and that would be considered dust. It's too small to spend. It's like not worth spending. So UTXO consolidation is the idea that when fees are sort of a bit lower, maybe around now, that you combine your UTXOs into bigger UTXOs so that they're more worthwhile spending in the future, and you'll pay a smaller percentage fee for making a transaction.
I actually realized Pete made a mistake earlier. He said I think it was a unique transaction output. It's a unspent transaction output. One for me.
They're all unique.
They are. That's right.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay, so
No, there's also some bug as a trivia, random trivia. I think there's 2 transactions in Bitcoin that have the same hash, so they're not unique.
okay.
Yeah, but different timestamps.
True, yeah, they're unique.
All right, so if so now, okay, so we effectively have this dust problem potentially where if, for example, I just zapped you, 10,000 satoshis and you didn't do anything with that for like 10 years, you're probably not going to be able to use that in all probability on the main chain in the future because the fees are going to be so high that it actually is functionally useless. I've actually got $5 of Ethereum, sorry, and
Dust.
it's literally dust.
Can't
It's
spend it.
it's like, yeah, I mean, this was from my youth in Ethereum, and yeah, literally you can't do anything with that. So what do you actually do though? So we're saying we're going to consolidate. What do you physically have to do? And then what's the smallest UTXO set that you want to have just to protect yourself for the short to medium term?
It's hard to say exact size, but I think the ballpark people give is like 1,000,000 sats seems to be like a pretty reasonable size for UTXO. How you consolidate them does depend on your wallet. Do you have a wallet in particular, or anyone in the audience has a wallet they want to consolidate? I can give it a try, but
I mean, broadly speaking, you could send all your Bitcoin to yourself in one transaction. That would consolidate all of it. In other wallets, you can select what UTXOs you go into a transaction, so you can be a bit more
yeah.
selective about it.
It's worth doing some reading about though, as it does come with some you lose some privacy if you if you've got all these UTXOs in your wallet and you send them all at once to one address. Then if anyone looks at that address, they can link all these these inputs, and they say, oh, those definitely came from the same person. So that's one thing to consider.
This is one of the biggest things with Bitcoin. It's like, it's almost like we beat this drum till it's almost dead, but it's like there's no solutions, only trade-offs. Because it's like, you must consolidate your UTXOs, and then it's like, yeah, you got no privacy. Because then if I want to buy I want to buy a $10,000 car in the future, and I've got like say 10 Bitcoins sitting there, the guy goes, wow, look at this fella, he's rich. Exactly. Are there any other practical sort of things that you guys would like to share that are from a scaling perspective?
Just on that UTXO one, what I might say is that it's a thing that we're dealing with now because we all use UTXOs on chain, and we live in a world where it's kind of normal for a person to have multiple UTXOs. As we were saying earlier, there is a limit to the number that can be actively used in the network, which means that, let's say 5-10 years down the line, it's very unlikely that a person will have multiple UTXOs. It's more likely that there will be tens of thousands of people sharing UTXOs. Now, one of the great things about that is you get sort of privacy for free at that point, because no one's got a fucking clue like who owns that UTXO, because it's split across so many different people, which is good. But this is probably something that is a problem now for people that have Bitcoin, and you might want to be aware of it. But it's very likely to just go away in the future just because of how scaling happens. And people will invent clever tools and services to make that easy for you.
Is it conceivable potentially in the future we have a situation where, let's say, me and 5 of my closest mates, who are all just Bitcoin millionaires, we pull our Bitcoin into some sort of federation, and then we're able to, I don't know if they whirlpool or mix or coin join or whatever they do.
eCash, yeah.
It's eCash, but then if I want to physically use that in the real world, then
Yeah.
How talk to us about that process then, because if we've got this federation, how do we actually spend in the real world?
So Fedimint and Cashew, these eCash mints, the way they interact with the real world outside of the mint, so you can make payments within the mint very easily, but once you want to pay a Lightning payment, it's outside of the mint. They don't want to accept this eCash from this mint that they probably don't trust. So most mints and other layer twos, they have these sort of gateways, and so they'll have a service that you can pay a Lightning invoice using your eCash, or you can pay a Liquid, you can send some money on Liquid to pay a Lightning invoice. Things like this, you can have these gateways, so you can interact and make payments outside of your shared UTXO.
Awesome. Okay. Are there any questions from anyone here? Okay. I will be the dude running around.
Awesome.
Okay. Because I'm definitely not going to answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for the very insightful pros and cons of all their layers and their options. I was curious to understand more about Bitcoin Cash. I know that wasn't mentioned, and I don't know if it's a
Bitcoin conflict.
controversial
I'm not sure
topic.
we can comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the Bitcoin Cash, I don't know if you can, if there's more to your question, or I can just riff on Bitcoin Cash. Uh, so yeah, the Bitcoin Cash tried to solve their scaling solution by increasing the block size, so increasing the amount of transactions that can go through every 10 minutes. Um, Bitcoin has done this as well. We've essentially increased the Bitcoin block size as well, but not as sort of drastically as Bitcoin Cash has, and Bitcoin Cash I think plans to do. Maybe it's dynamic. Um, the problem with this is that you do trade off other things. So with Bitcoin Cash, it's a lot harder for people like us in this room to run a Bitcoin Cash node. It's going to be terabytes and terabytes of storage. It's going to be a lot more. There's a lot more stuff happening on chain. You're going to need better like CPU computers and stuff to actually maintain that node. So you're sacrificing decentralization when you make some decisions like this.
And then I would just say, like, when you sacrifice decentralization, what you're really sacrificing is control over the system. So, like, one of the real beauties of Bitcoin is that you as an individual can have a say in the rules that you want to follow. So, if having 21 million coins is important to you, then you need to back up those rules, and we audit them every 10 minutes currently. And we do that by running our own nodes. So, if you can't run your own nodes in an economic capacity, then you don't get a say in that anymore. And then the people that do, they can select new rules. That's why it matters.
I think sometimes we even almost take it for granted in Bitcoin how easy it is to actually run a node. You can just buy one of these sort of plug and play Bitcoin nodes. It is actually incredible. You go to any other blockchain, good luck. Like, I wish you luck. It is impossible. You'll have a nightmare of a time getting a node running, managing it, keeping it online. So yeah, it's really awesome that we have this ability to do so, and it's something that we think is definitely worth protecting.
Yeah, so just want to ask a dumb question. Maybe you answer this, but I didn't understand. So if I have Bitcoin in multiple accounts and multiple wallets, like, should I put it in one wallet? Should I leave it split up? What do I do?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So it depends on how small those outputs are in your wallet, assuming it's a self custody wallet where you control the keys. So it's worth having a look, check that you don't have like some outputs that are worth $5 or $10. And if they are, then you should try and join them up with other outputs, consolidate them into bigger ones. It's perfectly fine to have multiple wallets. I've got multiple wallets. There's nothing wrong with that, and it can be useful and practical for using Bitcoin. Um, I would say that it there are some charts. I think there's a table. Like, I think if you look up like you know UTXO like fee chart or something.
A million sats.
Million sats is a good, yeah. Million sats.
Really
If million sats is like the ballpark number I give out. Yeah.
Another factor,
Or
though.
River. What's it called? River Financial has a chart which sort of has like, here are the different fee rates in the future, and here's how much it will cost, like percentage wise, to send a UTXO of a million sats or 100,000 sats or 10,000 sats. So it's a good one to look at. So if you like think, I think the fee market's going to be this in the future, it'll sort of tell you, I probably should have my UTXOs bigger than some value.
the important thing as well is to ensure that you're actually not commingling different stacks. So if you've got a no KYC stack, you've got an SMS stack, you've got your personal stack, your family trust stack, there's no point. It doesn't matter. UTXO consolidation aside, you've got to keep those all separate. All right. Sonny had his hand up there, and then I'll come to you, Wiz.
Thanks, guys. This is amazing. Quick question about Liquid and the blockchain. So, if they are running all this database in the blockchain, which we know is not the best, can I run that blockchain on my own Liquid node myself?
Yes, you can. Yep. You can't sign blocks. So when we said there was, let's say there's 21 people that are running the federation, what they're really doing is they're doing the signing of all the blocks and the processing of everything. So that you can't do, but you can download the Liquid blockchain and verify it yourself. It looks like just downloading a Bitcoin node. Except it's smaller because there's no transactions in it because it's Liquid.
There's all this free space, and I mean, I use it occasionally. I used it the other day.
Just one comment on the UTXO consolidation is consider time frame. So you can maybe once a year or once every few years you have a think about this, and it's not like you have to put the stack aside and think, oh, that's the stack I'm not going to spend till next decade, and I'm never going to touch it. Is you can think that's the stack I'm never going to spend till next decade, and this will be my UTXO size, and that's all done now. You don't have to not touch it until next year, until next decade. You can revisit that every year or every couple of years and go, what did we think the fee market was going to do? Okay, a couple of years has passed. What's actually happened? Oh, guess what? That other layer two, the ETFs, they've been very effective in keeping transactions low. So I don't need to do anything. Or we might say fees have gone up astronomically and now 1,000 sats per byte is cheap. Maybe I need to start combining some of those 1 million sat pieces of Bitcoin into 2 million or 5 million or 10 million.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's better to be a little bit safer than sorry, because once it's uneconomical to spend, you can't really consolidate at that point. It's like it's too late to sort of consolidate, or if you do, it's going to cost you like a crazy percentage of what you're consolidating. So it's better to stay, keep your UTXOs a bit bigger, stay on the safe side, especially if you're holding them for long term.
I might just say a quick thing about a couple of other scaling solutions, but not in any detail that we weren't hopefully going to go to. Is like there's things like ARC and timeout trees and roll-ups that you're going to start hearing about. A lot of these are like I kind of think about them as like Fedi mints with benefits. Like usually what you're doing is you're giving the problem of running something to somebody else. And then what a lot of these things are trying to design to do is to give you slightly better trust commitments around can it be debased and can I get my money back? And so that's really the area you're playing in with a lot of those. But if anyone wants to hit me up, I'm happy to talk about them offline. But I think I keep seeing no minutes left signs. So.
One more question at least.
This will be a waste because it was actually about that point about L2s and smart contracts and the developments that are happening. So maybe I can talk about it with you offline if it's not pertinent to this
I think
discussion.
Lloyd had a question, maybe. You can shout. He's a shouter.
Shout.
It's Mike.
Hey, so you guys, there seems to be an assumption that the fees are definitely going to go up in Bitcoin terms. Like, how do we verify this claim, or what's the projection? Is it possible that fees don't go up in Bitcoin terms? They just go up in US dollar terms as Bitcoin goes up in price?
I think they go up in US dollar terms. So when I talk specifically about it'll be the equivalent of spending $10,000 on a fee. And I say that because then that maps back to like what you're doing economically. So almost all of these layers are all about batching transactions and then settling once. So for that to be effective economically, like you need to batch, like 100 times the amount of that fee to then make it settle at a 1% fee aggregate, which is a level that we seem to be comfortable. That's why I talk about it. Like I think they'll be flat.
If you pay that now or later, it doesn't really matter. Like if I lose 10,000 sats now from fees because I'm consolidating right now, it's the same as losing 10,000 sats in the future because it's just 10,000 sats. Just the 10,000 sats in the future are worth a lot more money in US dollar terms, but I'm still the same amount of sats. So unless the
Because right
go
now I
up
can
in
find
sats
more
terms.
Bitcoin.
I think there will be an increase in demand for block space. I think
In
as we-
sats terms, like not
yes, in
US.
sats terms. Yeah, even if Bitcoin price doesn't change, I think the fee market will get more competitive just because more people coming into Bitcoin, more people wanting to open Lightning channels, start mints, do whatever on Bitcoin, inscribe JPEGs. This if Bitcoin goes in the direction it has been going and the direction I think most of us want it to go in, then it's going to become more competitive to get your transaction into a block.
Do you have like a ballpark number where you expect fees to like go out to in sats terms? It's like 100
I don't want to
sats.
think about it. It could be really scary.
Any other questions?
We need a scale. We need a scale so we don't so we get not so it's not too scary.
Do we have any other questions? Brenda?
Is there a private way to consolidate UTXOs? Or is that like a whirlpool kind of thing?
So Whirlpool actually doesn't allow you to. So Whirlpool's like a coin mixing thing, and you get all these outputs of equal denominations. But okay, yeah, so obviously a separate topic. But with Whirlpool, they don't let you recombine your outputs because they acknowledge that this is a privacy loss, and they don't want you to do this because like the whole point of it, the Whirlpool is to get privacy. The wallet actually prevents you from undoing that. But there is some other implementations of doing coin mixing that do let you sort of input multiple multiple inputs, and you can get multiple different sized outputs. That I think you can probably do it in a way that consolidates your UTXOs. Yeah, Lloyd's nodding, so that's a yes.
All right, we are done. Thank you very much, fellas. That was great.
Thank you.